a clean set of financials, right? Oftentimes we hear sellers that can talk about how they make money, but then you look at the books and it's not quite clear that that's actually how they make money.
If you violate a non-compete, you don't go to jail. The buyers don't get that, right? I have a 5-year non-compete. I'm like, you have to go after somebody you just gave $5 million to, and you spent $600,000-$700,000. Who's more likely to run out the long bill there and be okay?
You're listening to Before You Buy or Sell a Business, hosted by Jared Johnson, the top SBA lender in the country. On this show, we break down business acquisitions, talk to industry pros, and provide real-world advice for buyers and sellers.
All right, welcome back to Before You Buy or Sell a Business. Today I have Mark Sims on the podcast. We're excited to talk about a couple different things. I know you've got a lot of experience and a lot of great information that you're going to be able to, extend to people that are looking to buy and to those that are selling. And of course, probably also cover what to do once you buy a business. So I'm happy to have you on today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. Maybe give us a little intro, background, kind of where'd you grow up, a little bit about your career. And then of course, we'll dive into a little more detail.
Born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, or just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Lifelong afflicted Cleveland sports fan. Unfortunately, we can talk about that on a different episode. Ended up, kind of first half of my career, I spent in management consulting. Worked for a couple smaller boutique firms, and then I went to work for Ernst & Young, mainly doing large scale transformations, or at the time we called it business process reengineering. Now we call it digital transformation, primarily for kind of Fortune 1000 companies, typically around a large ERP implementation. Ended up going to work for one of my clients, Scott's Miracle-Gro. Spent kind of the second half of my career there. Was there for about 15 years. Had a bunch of different roles. So I led some large transformations over in Europe. I was the chief information officer. I led the strategy and M&A group, and then was actually CEO of a company that they had invested in. Once I left that company, I got back into consulting. And so that's what I do now is work for a company called Consult MSG. And we are primarily a M&A advisory firm, as well as we help our clients transform the businesses after they've acquired them.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. So obviously then you've got a great background to talk about, all kinds of different things. Definitely won't talk about the Cleveland sports. I don't know. I mean, you at least had a couple good runs there in basketball.
We did.
While. Yeah. Of course, baseball, but yeah. So football has been a little rough.
Yeah.
It seems like they've had a decent roster the last couple of years and good defense, and they're just so close every game. So
yeah, I mean, fundamentally, Cleveland is a football town, and so it's great. The Cavs won. The Indians are very competitive, but if the Browns ever won, look out.
They go a little crazy, but
right.
That's cool. So, all right, well, we'll try to stay on task because I know I could talk about sports all day long. But okay, so I know one thing that you and I kind of discussed a little bit before, and I've seen you post about it as well, is you're kind of 5 C's. Of course, everybody has kind of their thing in credit with the C's and everything, but maybe you could kind of dive into that, and then we'll kind of just continue to dig a little further after that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it's kind of, I call it the 5 C's of value creation and value preservation, right? However you want to think about it. And these, I think, are applicable to both sellers and buyers. And so if we go on one by one, and then we could dive deep, but, the first one is really competitive positioning. And so I think it's important for a seller to be able to articulate and know, like, where do they sit in the market? Why do they win? So let's say you're a roofing business in, Cleveland, Ohio, and you're doing residential roofing. Why are you winning jobs versus your competition, right? Where are you geographically strong? Where are your services strong, et cetera? When you go to sell the business, being able to articulate that to a potential buyer or set of buyers does 2 things. One is it helps them understand kind of where you sit today, but ideally you can also position it to say, hey, I'm a small fish in a big pond, right? So if you buy the business, you have tremendous amount of growth ahead of you, right? And you can really kind of help them understand and frame, where they sit today, and then, under different leadership with maybe a different, appetite for investment, where you could take the business. So I think that's very important. Second one is, and I've heard you talk about it on various shows, and I'm sure you know it well, is the cash flow cycle, right? So how are you actually taking and converting inventory that you purchase into cash, right? And what is that cycle? And do you really understand that cycle well? And again, can you articulate it to a buyer so they understand kind of what the working capital requirements of the business are? Or is it real choppy, right? Like that could be something that, 18 months, 12 months before someone's going to sell. You want to try to start to smooth that out. Maybe you're not great at collecting, payment from your customers, or you're, paying your vendors too early, or you're paying them too late. How do you make sure that you've dialed that in and you show expertise around kind of that cash flow cycle? The third one, and I will pause after this one, see if you have any questions on the first three. Third one is really kind of one we see all the time when we're doing due diligence, and it can add a lot of friction, is a clean set of financials, right? And that can even expand to a clean set of data or operational data. And so oftentimes we hear sellers that can talk about how they make money, but then you look at the books and it's not quite clear that that's actually how they make money. So they think that, SKU A is their top selling SKU, or, company XYZ is the most profitable. But in reality, when you look at the numbers, it's not the case, right? So having that clean, trusted set of financials, set of operational data to actually demonstrate and prove how you make money is key. And, the one key thing about this, and I know you know it well, any friction in a deal is going to potentially kill a deal. And so as much as you can take friction out, and the data is kind of the biggest piece, is if people can't piece it together, or they're having to do a lot of work to figure out how your business works, they may get frustrated and just walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost feel like you could kind of tie all three together, right? So, if you've got
Sure.
great books, if you really understand your cash flow, it's a competitive advantage. I would also say that these are probably three things that buyers should really be focusing on as
Yes.
well. So it's kind of nice that they're interchangeable. But one of the big challenges I notice over, years of doing this is that the sellers really don't understand even those three things most of the time. Starting to see it be a little better as you get into sort of the upper end of the smaller size or medium sized businesses, which is nice. It always makes our lives a little easier, but it's great to be able to kind of explain to these sellers, like, if you are thinking of selling, this is something that you really need to highlight and understand. But I think it also can translate to, if you're already in the business or you just took over a business, these are things that really need to be focused on. And too many people just either focus on one or none of them, and kind of just are in the business going head down, trying to survive. And in reality, if they kind of pause, work on these things, understand them, understand how to tweak them, how to make them better, they're going to be a lot more successful. And then, of course, a lot more appetizing to a buyer.
Yeah, no, 100%. So maybe I'll hit the last two, and then we
Sure.
can, kind of talk about it. So the last two, the fourth one is really around concentration free, right? So this is an obvious one, but, as people are looking to sell a business, if 80% of your, sales come from, two customers, that's going to be a red flag to a buyer. Also, like if you're beholden to a vendor, right? You have kind of a single supplier that you're beholden to, that can be a challenge as well. So trying to kind of diversify and make sure you don't have a high customer or vendor concentration. And then the last one, and this is kind of a broad catch-all, and I know it'll resonate with you, is capabilities, right? And so a lot of what this gets into, are you documenting how things get done in the business, right? Like, what are the processes that are used? What are the standard operating procedures? What are the policies, practices, et cetera, around how you operate the business? Another one is another kind of key piece of this capabilities is, you've communicated to the potential buyer that, you've got these customers are in love with you. Well, do you have contracts with the customers, right? Like, and what do those contracts say? And then on the opposite side, you may say, hey, I've got really preferred pricing with our key vendors. Well, do you actually have a contract? Because as soon as I buy the business, they may not have they may see that as a perfect time to renegotiate and raise prices. And so again, when a buyer's coming in, they want to have certainty, right? So much of this gets into a buyer's only going to pay for transferable value. And so you may have sweetheart deals and inside connections and things like that, but if those aren't transferable to the potential buyer, that is a challenge. And then, the other thing is, you mentioned it. If you're a buyer, these are things you should be checking on as well, right? Because if when you look at nothing's written down, right? There's no processes documented, policies, procedures, et cetera. And you can tell that the founder owner is very involved in the business. Once you hand that person a big check, even if they say they want to like roll equity and stay in the business or whatever it might be, they are now not the owner, right? They're an employee. They may not be used to having a boss. And so who knows how long they're going to stick around, but it's a real, a risk if everything was kind of funneled through that one individual who is now kind of, in a different mind, if not there at all, is maybe just in a different mindset. That could be a red flag, because now you're going to have to figure it out once you already own the business and, all the checks have cleared.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a couple things on the concentrations. What would you consider to be, kind of a threshold for concentrations?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I look at it is, and again, this can vary by industry and vary by, different markets. But I think the reality is, like, if you have two customers that make up more than half your business, I'd see that as a potential challenge, because if you lose any one of them, it's a big hit to the business, even if they just materially decrease what they have. But like I said, a lot of it is probably, buyer dependent, because, somebody may represent 20%, and given the way they finance or structure the deal, any material impact to that business could, kind of crater the whole structure of what they were expecting to do.
Yeah, so if you were talking to a buyer and you're on the buy side, what would you recommend they do to mitigate it? Or would you just flat out say at a certain amount or percentage, it's not worth, taking the risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, you probably have a lot of experience in this as well. I'll be interested in your take, but I think part of it is, if you're on the buy side, I think part of it is like, how do you now start to handicap the multiple to kind of implement or address that risk, right? So it's like, I'm willing to pay. You've done the Q of E, you're good with the EBITDA side, but it's just simple math. If I now see risk, I'm going to decrease the multiple, because that's one way to do it. Another way would be kind of through an earnout structure. Those always get complicated to actually execute, and what's the baseline. But there are, those are structures that are helpful in that type of situation where there's risk and uncertainty around really any part of the business.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you mentioned, every industry, every business is going to be a little different. And it kind of ties into your other side, is like, is there any contracts? How likely are they to stay with you without actually spending time and talking to that customer or knowing the customer? You
Mm-hmm.
don't really know, not only is there a risk because there's concentration, but if you, have them kind of, tied down where like you're the only one manufacturing that widget that they need in the middle of their, manufacturing process or something, there's a lot less likelihood that they are going to be able to go to somewhere else and kind of ditch you. But at the same time, if there's no contracts, there's nothing really tying them to you. It's a big risk. And,
Yeah.
Normally the way I kind of look at it is, if you were to remove that, and it's really difficult to tell, what margin do you really get from that specific customer? But if you
Right.
could try to estimate it or gauge it, you kind of look at it as like worst case scenario. If you lost that customer, what do the numbers look like? Would you be able to service any debt? How would that really affect the business? And then kind of work backwards from there, and then decide, does it really make any sense to move forward, or can you find a way to mitigate it? And oftentimes, unfortunately, what I see is that buyers are searching for so long that the second they find something, they're
Yep.
just so excited about it that they're willing to kind of put these blinders on and go, well, yeah, it's only 30% of of the revenue.
Right.
And it's like, no, like go talk to somebody that day 30 that customer left and see what they would have done, and had they have bought the business and stuff. It can get pretty ugly.
And I think there's a tenure aspect of this as well. Like if it's a brand new customer, meaning you've had it for 2 years and we've seen crazy growth, that may seem amazing, but that also may be, how sticky are you as a supplier for them? So that's kind of one aspect of it. The other thing, again, it goes back to the founder owner. How much is their loyalty potentially tied to the founder owner? Because maybe that other business, they grew up together, right? Like, so they help build each other's businesses. And, now that you've got, someone new in charge, maybe they transact their business. Now it's just kind of an open forum, and the relationship isn't there. So kind of trying to understand those things, you're not going to get 100%, but understanding the history can be helpful and inform kind of, what is the likelihood of that risk. The one other thing I'll mention, you just brought it up. It's a real thing. I've seen it, kind of on the corporate side, but deal fever, right? You mentioned it's, maybe it's more deal fatigue that you were mentioning, in terms of like, I've turned over a lot of, rocks, and I haven't found anything. Now I find something that's really solid, but then you start to see some different issues with the business. You got to really guard against explaining those things away, because if there's enough of those and you explain enough of them away, you start to materially, impact the deal.
Yeah, yeah, and it happens so often. I'm sitting there going, I've been working with you for 2 years, and when we started, you were, kicking every deal out because of one little thing, and then now you're willing to accept five things. Like,
Yeah.
come on, let's get this back together on the same page. And then going to the fifth thing. So you're absolutely right. And I think one thing that not enough people pay attention to, and they sort of tie together, is the non-compete risk, right? So
Yeah.
if you've got a
Great point.
seller that is the majority of the business, they're holding the relationships, it's their innovation, their ideas, all that kind of stuff. That's who the customer's used to dealing with. You've got a pretty big risk there that either they're not going to like your personality, they're not going to like the way you're doing business. But the other side, and something that we've seen happen way too often lately, is that the seller gets bored, or heaven forbid they were being malicious from the beginning, but they go and start a competing business, or even go work somewhere else as a competitor and steal the customers away. And
Yeah.
there's not much you can do. And I had someone the other day tell me I need to get a shirt made that says, if you violate a non-compete, you don't go to jail. Because the buyers don't get that, right? They, oh, well, I have a 5-year non-compete. And I'm like, but do you understand that, like, now you have to go after this person. You have to go after somebody you just gave $5 million to, and you
Right.
spent, $600,000-700,000. Who's more likely to, run out the long bill there and be okay? So
Right.
yeah, it's tough. Of course, you never know exactly what's going to happen with the seller, but it's something we need to pay attention to, and it does affect valuation as well. And then too many people I hear, going back to your fifth one, of having kind of like, an SOP in place, right? And having the ability to walk in day one and go, okay, there's procedures in place. This stuff is written down. There's policies here. I know how to run this business. If not, I have something to go to and look at. Not enough people do that. And I think a lot of it has to do with just being so busy and being wrapped up in the business that they don't take the time to do it. But it does affect valuation as well. So
yeah, I mean, we hear that a lot from, again, when we're doing buy side diligence, and fundamentally, kind of where I focus is in the technology space, and where you find that things aren't written down, things aren't documented, or they can't find the documentation, right, for license contracts, whatever it might be. A lot of times, and it's legitimate, the founder owner is saying, well, hey, I've been focused on growing the business, right? I haven't been focused on building the back office and documenting everything. And I get that, right? They've built a nice business, and they've been customer facing. But, in my perspective, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. You don't necessarily even need to, hire anybody to do it. Part of it is just leveraging your existing staff and set some goals around, like, let's start writing these things down. Let's get more organized, right? So a lot of these are really pragmatic ideas and pragmatic things you can do that even if you never sell your business, they're probably going to be helpful as you have turnover, right? People now know how things are done. A lot of times it's eye-opening when people actually write it down and they're like, that's how things are done. Like, I didn't know. Right. And that's how we're, approving expenses, or we're, that's how we're invoices, et cetera. So all that can be very helpful just to make sure you're examining your business and are you operating as efficiently and effectively as you can.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the best ways to kind of figure out, like, wait, that's really how we do our process. I can't believe that we've been doing it that way.
Right.
Why? And it's like, I don't know, it's just how we've always done it. Like, how many times do you hear that? So it's really interesting. Yeah, and I think also it again goes back to something that a buyer should be paying attention to, because if they're looking at the business and the business is essentially run by the seller, they're the one doing everything. There's not really actual stuff in place explaining how they're doing things. They need to kind of consider the fact that they're probably going to have to come in and spend some money. They may need to replace a couple people. They may need to add a couple people, kind of get that layer of management that needs to be in place. And they need to factor that in when they're, figuring out the value of the business. And not enough people pay attention to that. But of course, on the seller side as well, I'd assume if someone comes to you and they are saying, hey, in another 18 to 24 months, I want to sell my business. What do I need to work on? I'm assuming that's one of the things you want to work on, but maybe you could, maybe kind of run through that. If a seller came to you and said, I've got 18 months,
Sure.
What do I do?
Yeah, no, I think that's somewhere where the 5 C's kind of shook out, right? Is like, even though some of the largest private equity firms that we work with, before they're about to sell one of their portfolio companies, they will sparkle it up, they'll shine it up and make it put its best foot forward. So part of it is, in addition to the things I mentioned, part of it is really starting to take a look at, where are there friends of on the payroll, right? So again, that obviously during due diligence and financial due diligence from a Q of E perspective, you can, kind of, pull those things out and say, we're no longer going to, have these kind of friends and family that are part of the business, but maybe not full-time operators. Any expenses that you have that are, maybe not directly tied to growing the business, starting to pull those things out, at least 12 months prior, so that you've got a clean set of books that really reflect the true operational capability of the business and what it truly costs to operate the business from an SG&A perspective. So I think that's kind of a key aspect. Again, I think getting organized, right? And we've talked about some of the back office stuff, but let's say it's a manufacturing facility. A lot of times someone's going to want a plant tour and they're going to want to come into the facility. Making sure the facility is, your old boat isn't sitting there. You don't have all kinds of old excess and obsolete inventory, packaging that's from 5 years ago, whatever it might be. Take the time to, clear those things out in order to take your best foot forward or put your best foot forward. The thing that everybody can understand is that before you go to sell your house, you're going to take care and look to fix all the little nits that you've lived with. But because you're going to have a bunch of potential buyers coming through, you want to, put a fresh coat of paint on, you want to replace the carpet, whatever it might be. That same mentality needs to be in play. How do you make this asset look as attractive as possible and really kind of make sure you highlight all the best features and then address any areas where there's gaps.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I've heard people say it before too, is if you kind of sort of always operate the business as if you're ready to sell it tomorrow, then you'll take care of a lot of those things and you'll definitely be ready to go.
Yeah, I'm sure if you had a certified exit planner, that's kind of their mentality is, right? Mm-hmm. Always be ready to sell.
Yeah. So bringing that up. So what type of advisors do you think are absolutely necessary? So maybe sell side and buy side, are there people that you feel like no matter what you need to have them, and then some maybe are situational?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, kind of pull on some experiences when I was on the corporate side and we were acquiring, kind of small add-on acquisitions. These are smaller businesses, right? So Scott's is $4 billion business, and we were acquiring, sub $20 million businesses in specific categories. And we used to actually have to, advise these sellers and kind of implore them, right, to hire better counsel, right? So it's great that this person, did a bang up job on, your divorce or your real estate transactions, but they're not an M&A attorney. And again, we talked about earlier about friction, right? Somebody who's now redlining things that are kind of common practice within a purchase agreement. You can't spend a lot of time going back and forth, right? So we used to really try to highlight to folks, make sure you have the proper attorneys working on the deal. The other one, and this is a huge one, and I'm sure there's a lot of advisors out there that you probably had on your show, but again, we used to work with folks and they were trying to debate, small Q of E adjustments, whatever it might be, yet they weren't really addressing the deal structure and having tax advisors help them understand the best way to structure the deal so they could, to make sure they paid the minimal amount of taxes possible. Anything you're going to lose on kind of taxes is way going to outweigh all of these Q of E adjustments that you're fighting really hard for. So I think those are two key advisors, is making sure you have the, an attorney with the proper background, meaning, also making sure you've got the right tax advisors who can help you understand the best way to structure the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes sense. I know each industry can kind of bring somebody else in as well, as far as, what the advisors want to, need to help with.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other one too is, and again, it's a service we offer, so maybe I'm obligated to ask it, but, or state it, but like the financial due diligence, right? Doing a quality of earnings. So really taking a look at the books. It hits on the 3C, number 3C of clean and trusted financials, but someone who can get in there, look at the books and truly understand, kind of what are legitimate, kind of non-continuing expenses that they're pulling out and adjustments that they're making versus things that it's like, well, is that really a one-timer and won't be here any longer? Or is that, kind of a maintenance item that I'm going to have to continue to spend each and every year? So having somebody look at the books from a Q of E perspective, I think is another key advisor.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk about how you would consult or advise a buyer, maybe right before they close, and then what they should do the first maybe 30, 60, 90 days. I know some people have a theory of like, sit back and kind of watch, don't change anything unless like something is absolutely broken. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
A couple of things. One, it all points back to if you have a solid value creation plan, right? And hopefully, we talked about turning over a lot of rocks. Hopefully you've started formulating that value creation plan when you decided to submit an LOI or an IOI, right? Like you've already formulated, okay, if I own this business, what would I do with it to grow it and actually create value for myself and for any of my investors? So I think so much of it is going to kind of stem off of that. Meaning, are there, revenue synergies that you see that this particular business isn't taking advantage of, geographies that they could pivot to? Again, maybe they're not being aggressive enough on, marketing spend, whatever it might be. So whatever that, kind of value creation plan is. And then you obviously have the cost side. There may be things where you think you can take cost out and or get, more efficient and effective in the way that you're manufacturing something to improve your gross margins. So, I think all of that value creation plan, you need to create it from the very beginning, right? As you're prior to the LOI. And then you actually then need to, pressure test that all along the way. That's what the due diligence helps for, is like, are all my assumptions under the value creation plan still valid, right? Or did I learn something new that's going to give me pause, maybe either in how fast I can go or potentially, what I can do. And then, once you close, ideally you're now starting to execute that value creation plan, right? And so to your point, there may be, and we do deal with a lot of buyers that their first instincts are kind of first do no harm, meaning let's, for the first, 90 days, 100 days, whatever it might be, let's just get in there and learn the business. And that may be the appropriate piece. And then I want to, jump in, and now I'm going to start to execute some of the elements of my value creation plan in terms of cross sell, upsell, right? New marketing, new media, whatever it might be. But sometimes I think the challenge I see is, 100 days turns into 200 days. And once you buy the business, now you're tied up in the operations, and you don't have maybe the capacity to execute some of those things. So I think, you need to be disciplined and constantly making sure that, you're reminding yourself, why did I buy this business? How do I think, or what did I think I could do to actually, create value and grow the business faster, or, extract higher margins, whatever it might be, and make sure that you're staying true to that plan and executing against it on a timeline that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Yeah. And I always think it's funny when someone says like, well, no, don't touch anything for 6 months, like just leave it alone. And I kind of look at it as like, well, there may be something that you need to do immediately, and there may be some things that you don't really see until you do sit there for 6 months. And we've all heard the stories of like they close and then the GM's like, I'm out of here. And then it's like, okay, well, now you have to do something,
Right.
So you can't sit around for 6 months. So, yeah.
Well, and I think so much of it's situated, meaning if it's an acquisition that you're just, acquiring a roofing business because you've been, an employee of a roofing business, and now you want to be the owner. So that, what do you think, meaning, is that company you just bought doing everything the way that you would do it, over your career? If not, then you should probably start to change the policies and procedures. Maybe it's the scheduling practices. Maybe it's the way the crews work. Maybe it's the pricing, right? So you're going to want to implement those things because you bring kind of domain and industry expertise. If you already own a roofing business and you're acquiring a competitor or somebody in another city, again, if you think through and you say, oh, well, I'm not going to do anything for 6 months, well, you may have a lot of duplicate costs that isn't going to help anybody, right? And so if there's, things that you should start doing right away, like how do I combine my sales forces? How do I combine my crews, whatever it might be? So much of it is kind of situational dependent. I guess the whole point is, truly before you close, and I know there's a lot of work as you're trying to get to that point, but make sure you've got a plan and then really just stay true to the plan and execute. And a lot of that could be, why did you buy it in the first place? How did you think you were going to create value? And make sure you're taking the steps to do that. If you're finding that for 6 months, you're just going to have to learn the business because maybe you don't have industry expertise, you just need to, if that's the reality, you just need to factor that into kind of the financials and kind of what you're going to get out of it and when you're going to start to really be able to execute, kind of improvements in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. You hit the nail on the head there. So I know my listeners like to hear stories of real deals. Do you have anything that you could possibly share, without going into too much detail? Maybe one of the weirdest things you've seen from a seller or a buyer, or something really bad that's happened or really good. I know I'm putting you on the spot. So
no, I think the interesting things I've seen, and again, I've talked to other folks in the industry, is, I've been impressed, I'll say it that way, of people being able to walk away from a lot of money that a buyer wants to spend to acquire a target's business. And it's for, very trivial things, right? So I've seen it where a title, meaning, the seller wanted to stay in the business, right? And the buyer wanted them to help run the business, but because they didn't have kind of the title that they thought they should have, just didn't make sense given the way that the deal was structured. They walked away from a very large sum of money. And so that's kind of one that's scratched my head. And, again, I think that business continued to thrive, but it was really interesting. On the other end of the spectrum, a lot of times we see, things with family members that come up 11th hour where, you've had all the diligence and the lawyers have been looking at everything, but then it turns out that the domain name is actually owned by the ex-brother-in-law that they're no longer on speaking terms. So it's not like, okay, well, how do we get access to the actual credentials for the domain? And how do we, get into, be able to change it or whatever it might be and get that to transfer. So those are some things that you see kind of on two different ends of the spectrum. One is a very logistical item, but it comes up quite often. And there's other stories, again, about, kind of different deal structures, forgotten partners, things of that nature that can throw wrenches into deals at the 11th hour. But yeah, those are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, we've all had really weird, odd things happen at the last second, and I think a lot of times, of course, any transaction is going to bring everything to the surface, right? So
Right.
you're either going to find, all the skeletons, you're going to find anything missing, you're going to realize that you never even knew that the brother-in-law owned the domain name. But I also feel like there's definitely something to be said about sellers that maybe aren't, and buyers as well. They might not be 100% in, and they're a little, they've got cold
Sure.
feet, and they're just looking for one thing to kind of, hit the ripcord and be done. And a lot of times that's sort of how I feel when something like that comes up, and they just kind of go, yeah, deal's dead, we're done. And I'm like, it's so trivial, like what are you talking about? And it's kind of, sometimes I'll even kind of call them out, like, hey, are you just having cold feet? You're just nervous about this?
Yeah.
Like, this is a big number of debt. Maybe your spouse is beating you up on, if this is really the right thing for you and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It's kind of normal to have those feelings. And the same on the seller side, right? They're sitting there going, I'm sending my kid off, off to college,
Yeah.
or my daughter off to get married. And you're like, is there any way to end this now and not have to deal with the pain of it? But yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and again, one of the things, I talk to a lot of folks about is, again, we work with a lot of private equity buyers, and really they always appreciate when the seller will actually roll equity. And a lot of times those sellers want to, and the buyers want them to stay in the business. Part of the challenge, and when I talk to sellers that they really need to think through is, you've been running this business for 20 years, right? And you never had a boss, right? Now you're going to have a boss. You're going to have a board of directors. You're going to have other people making changes to your business that you may or may not agree with. And so you really have to challenge yourself to say, I want to move away out of, kind of CEO role, and I'm going to focus on sales because that's what I started doing. That's what I love to do. Right. All that sounds good and probably could be a great pivot, but they just have to ask themselves and be really honest with themselves to, is this really something that 6 months, a year, 2 years from now that I can see being happy doing this, given all the kind of structural changes, as well as you just got a pile of money, right? So again, as we talked about it, it changes your perspective a little bit that, I now have a boss, but I've also got, a lot of other things maybe I want to do. And are those things compatible? I think that's a key thing for sellers to really be honest with themselves.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. It's a little different when you've always wanted a certain thing that you couldn't afford, or vacations or something. And then I think there's a lot of sellers that they enjoy going in, they enjoy, working in the business, seeing all the staff, all that kind of stuff. And it being able to sort of take a step back, but not having to have all those same stresses and everything, I think, really works for them as well. So it ends up usually working out one way or another, or they kind of quickly realize it's not for them, and maybe it's time to be done, and forego some of that earnout.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of, you're talking about like anecdotes when I was at Scott's, and we were, again, a very large company, a lot of bureaucracy, or a lot of structure and governance, I'll call it. I won't call it bureaucracy. And, we're acquiring these smaller businesses, and they'd say, hey, we want to come work in the business and work for you. And we, these people were very entrepreneurial, and we would try to talk them out of it, meaning, are you sure? Right? Like, this is, you know, before, when you would just wake up on a Wednesday and you'd make a decision to, like, we're going to go into this new product line. And now that is going to be, have to go through various levels of approval and kind of structured governance, right? Is that really something you want to do, is go from working for a 20-person outfit that you're leading versus now you're part of a, 6,000, employees, and you're working on part of it. But again, being honest with yourself, is that really an environment that you think would be conducive for, what you like to do?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Yeah, it's been great. You've provided a lot of really good information for us. I always ask two questions at the end, so we'll
Okay.
move on to those. So first one is, do you have a mentor or have you ever had a mentor?
Never really had a mentor. I've had the opportunity to have various business coaches kind of throughout my career at different points, and they were invaluable. A lot of the areas where they were helpful was kind of on the communication side, right? So as I transition and kind of move to higher levels of authority, how to make sure you're effectively communicating, to your team, effectively communicating to your peers, and then effectively communicating up. And so that's those folks have been invaluable in helping me.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Okay, and then final question, what motivates you?
What I really like to do is solve problems. And that can be a good skill as a consultant, right? Sometimes it can be, not a good skill in personal lives when you're trying to solve other people's problems and they just want you to be a sounding board. They don't want you to, step in and help them. But fundamentally, kind of that's what I like to do, and that takes kind of all manner of different directions. But that's kind of a key thing that motivates me is finding something really complex and or something that nobody's ever done, or they don't know the exact steps to do it, and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand that. That's how I am as well. And like you mentioned, it makes relationships tough because I also have this problem where I look at somebody and I kind of immediately go, what you're doing in your life is wrong. And here's how
Yeah,
to fix it. And they're like, I didn't ask for that. Like, and they try to kind of push you away, So yeah,
right,
there's times where
exactly.
my wife will tell me, I didn't come to you to solve the problem. I just
Yes,
wanted to talk to you about the problem. And I'm like, you don't get it. Like the second I see a problem, I have to fix it. That's just who I
yeah,
am. So yeah, my dad told me one day that's how he is. And I just kind of went, well, thanks. Like,
right.
so
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting, tying your two questions together. I had an employee, and she would get frustrated because, again, she would come, had a lot going on, and she would come to me, and I'd try to like solve the problems she was telling me about, and she'd get really frustrated. And at the time, I had a coach, and that coach helped me understand that, that person is probably just venting a little bit and just wants to, kind of tell you everything they got going on, and isn't looking for your help, right? Like if they wanted your help, they would explicitly ask for it. So again, that was one of the areas, as I said, kind of managing my team was helpful communication to understand, where I should try to, kind of forcefully help versus just, kind of sit back, listen, and then wait for someone to invite me into, to help.
Yeah, and not very often can we actually sit there and wait for them. We just kind of take
Right.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously it ends up working well in careers and where that's something that's definitely needed. But of course, in other places it can be tough. But
That's right. That's right.
yeah. So where can people find you?
Yeah. So if people want to email me directly, it's sims at consultmsg.com, or they can find us on the web at www.consultmsg.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming by. I appreciate it. Maybe we'll have to do a follow up sometime soon and talk about a couple other topics that we probably could have gone a little further into, but I appreciate your time either way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jared.
We are doing a community group for ETA in Fort Worth. So if you are in the DFW or Texas, or if you want to fly in, come on in. It's called Acquire Fort Worth. Basically, what we're doing is getting together once a month. We're partnering with a community college in Tarrant County, and we're focused on getting people together that are looking to buy businesses. So our hope is that we'll get people together to either discover acquiring a business, or maybe they're already in the process of looking, or they may have recently acquired a business. So our hope is to get those people together, have some great conversations, and continue to hone the craft and get better and better at buying businesses. On top of that, there may be some opportunities that come up for those that are looking in the area. A lot of times we'll have business brokers, attorneys, or other business owners that come through that are excited to bring businesses to the market. So hopefully we'll be able to have some deals come together. And at the end of the day, we're just really trying to get people together that are like-minded, that want to spend time together. So come check it out. It's Acquire Fort Worth. You can find it on my website. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. We'll be updating those events as they come together. So hopefully we'll see you soon there. And again, thank you for stopping by. I hope that this has been fruitful for you, and I wish you all the luck as you look for a business in the future.
Thank you all for listening to Before You Buy or Sell a Business. If you found value in this episode, please follow the show, leave a positive review, and share it with someone. For more information, check out jaredwjohnson.com. We'll see you all next time.